International Relations Professor at the U of I is Nicholas Grossman, author of Drones and Terrorism. He knows more than we know. He just wrapped up another great school year at the University of Illinois. Congratulations on that. How'd finals go?
Thank you. Finals went well. I'd say the students did well, and, all the bureaucratic stuff is not fun in the end, but it's done, and I'm happy with that and ready for the summer.
How did Steve do?
Just graded from afar based on radio posts. Probably, I'd say, solid B+.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
But he graded it on a boomerang-like curve. Yes. All right, so here's what we know. The incursion into Rafah by the Israelis in the strike in Rafah has been said by the White House not to have crossed a red line, and there's no change in policy. Those who have sided strongly with the Palestinian side, with the civilians in Gaza and how the killing must stop, are very upset about this. What do we know beyond that, and what can you tell us about what that strike was?
Well, on the specific strike, the Israelis say that they were targeting a Hamas leader, a commander who runs operations in the West Bank, and they named him specifically. So while, of course, people in war have an incentive to exaggerate and spin and, sometimes lie, that when they name a specific person, I've never seen that not be true, in part because there's such a strong incentive for a terrorist group, an insurgent group, anybody fighting a bigger government. There's such a strong incentive, if they're lying, to just have the guy show up with today's newspaper and be like,
right.
Look, you can't get me, and they're such liars and so on. And Hamas hasn't done anything like that, so I believe that part is true. The result of this explosion caused fires in a tent camp, and the death toll is high, looks to be about 45, including some little kids. And the Israelis say that they use, and the U.S. just confirmed, that they used a smaller precision weapon rather than the big bombs, the big 2,000-pound bombs that the U.S. was cutting off. That said, they did it in an area that looks to be very close to a safe evacuation zone, not right in it, and they claim that there were secondary explosions. Maybe Hamas had some munitions there, and all of that amounts to excuse-making because secondary explosions happen when you take shots into, areas where you think that people might potentially be storing weapons. And they were able to see a bunch of tents around what were the sheds that they blew up, and people moving around when they originally took the shot so they could see this. The issue with the U.S. red line is that the way that the Biden administration worded it was pretty carefully in the sense of that what they opposed was a large, heavy ground invasion of Rafah, and shooting missiles into Rafah, and even the extent of some Israeli ground operations are arguably on the not heavy, not big side of the line, maybe. So just on that, walking that, careful kind of red line thing, the U.S. left itself enough ambiguity that it can say yes or no. But of course, the people who want to see the war stop, who wanted Israel to not go into Rafah at all in the first place, are quite upset about this because this sort of thing with a bunch of innocent people being killed is exactly the sort of thing that they were worried about and wanted not to happen.
Yeah. So let's talk about, it's Spain, Ireland, Norway. They're all recognizing a Palestinian state. Tell us why that matters.
So at most levels, I think it doesn't really, that it doesn't matter much simply because there isn't a Palestinian state. If there were, then what was everybody fighting about? And the elements, so to the extent I guess it does matter, is it's symbolic. They join about 150 countries that already recognize a Palestinian state. The U.S. does not, in part, large part because the U.S. position is that something that should be worked out in negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians as part of the broader two-state solution framework, not something that should just be arbitrarily declared, especially when there literally isn't a Palestinian state. But the advantages are it shows Israel more diplomatically isolated. It shows the advantages, meaning for advocates for the Palestinian state. Israel more isolated creates more diplomatic pressure on them, potentially can gain Palestinians access to more international forums. So something like UN membership is how the Palestinians are able to join the International Criminal Court, which is how the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over what's going on in Gaza, which is how they ended up indicting both Hamas members and leaders of the Israeli government. So there are some diplomatic elements to it, but ultimately, I think it's mostly for show, mostly symbolic. It's not going to change anything concrete on the ground.
There is a belief, and I certainly share this belief, that this is incredibly difficult to solve, and it only goes back to the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. The Middle East, in regards to the fact that Israel certainly has a right to defend itself, but where is that line, imaginary or real, where you have to stop? And what is a defense of your constant need to defend? Nobody in their right mind wants to see Gaza civilians killed, and certainly not women and children, as we always discuss. But, the other piece of this, Professor Grossman, if we wake up this morning and we find out that Indiana and Michigan and Wisconsin and Iowa suddenly want to put us off or blow us off the map, we would certainly defend ourselves. So I don't know what America does in this role. I don't know what Biden can do in this role. Netanyahu is going to stay out of jail as long as he's in power. Those are his own political problems. There's certainly reason to believe that some of this is a result of that, but it's hard to believe that it's all because of that. It's just such a mess. The more you talk about it, the bigger the pile gets.
Yes, and very much so. And this problem has bedeviled the world for 75 years, really, with the specifics, and farther back. If you go into all the history, say before the founding of Israel too, but especially the last 75 years with the Palestinian question of people who were displaced and then don't have a state, and adding to the complication of the idea that yes, Israel, any state would defend itself after something like the October 7th attacks, but also Hamas doesn't stand and fight. They use a broader human shield strategy where they make a point of being around civilians and at pretty much all times are hiding in tunnels below civilian areas. And that means a situation of either, they do this because it's a successful strategy. It results in getting a bunch of Palestinians killed and then results in more international pressure on Israel as opposed to on Hamas. But that being attacked and having a genuine national security interest doesn't mean that you can do literally anything. That this is the entire concept of the ethics of war, the laws of war, the way that professional militaries operate, the way that the United States operated in Iraq or Afghanistan, which also had a number of flaws to it, but was not nearly as brutal as what the Israelis are doing in Gaza. So the answer really is that nobody knows. And I think mostly from the U.S. perspective, the goal is to try to limit the civilian casualties to the extent that they can pressure Israel to be more careful. But ultimately, to have Israel, this is the last spot in Gaza that Hamas still is more operational. And it also is packed with people displaced from other parts by the fighting, which is why the civilian casualties are even higher. But still, there isn't really a solution as long as Israel and Hamas don't agree on any of the negotiated ceasefire proposals. And that means that then in probably, if I had to guess, about maybe 1 to 2 months, that the Israelis will have control of, at least operational control of Rafah, and then probably declare it sort of over, at least the heavy combat. And then we get to the next terrible problem, which is how to possibly manage the Strip afterwards. Who's going to be in charge, who's going to provide security, who's going to deal with the insurgency elements of whatever remains of Hamas, or to the extent Hamas has been able to, and other groups have been able to use a lot of this violence to recruit people because, if there's, say, like some, young guy in Gaza who doesn't like Hamas, and then an Israeli bomb blows up his family, then he is, more inclined to perhaps join them and fight also. And that is going to be a giant mess as well. That this is one of those things where it's going to be a really bad problem, including with things like famine for a while.
When we come back with you next time, we'll take up other things, including why North Korea has missile problems and the fine operation that is North Korea.
Yeah.
And
Sure. If anything, North Korea's missile problems are a more pleasant topic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah, I mean, the quotes
How
here
about
from
that?
Nicholas is next terrible problem and giant mess.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, that's what jumps out. Professor Grossman, we will be in touch soon, so change your number.
I mean, I just want to call you on.
Thank you.
I'm just going to text you and start asking questions.
He's the best.
He's
He's just the best.
Yeah.
And again, author of Drones and Terrorism, a real deep dive, but an understandable one on the new way of war.
Yeah. And North Korea's missiles are a more pleasant topic.
I mean, he's not kidding.